Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new episode of Stories from Space podcast, where your host, Matthew Williams, examines the history of human spaceflight, the breakthroughs that revolutionized our understanding of the universe and our place in it, and the brave individuals who work tirelessly to advance the frontiers of our understanding. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Really big airports that have, Terminal A, Terminal B, Terminal E, all these different terminals we have to go to. And, normally you walk along at about 3 miles an hour at the airport, and you're going from one gate to another gate. But in some locations you have these horizontal travelators, conveyor belts, if you will, and you're walking along at 3 miles an hour, and then you step on top of this belt. Right, you're still most of us still walk while we're on the belt. So you're walking at 3 miles an hour on the belt, but the belt is actually moving as well. In conceptually speaking, the belt is contracting space in front of you, and the belt is going underneath and looping back around on the back, and so it's expanding space behind you. So the travelator contracts space in front of you and expands space behind you so that it augments your apparent speed. And so you actually look like you're going faster, even though locally you're still going at 3 miles an hour. So somebody sitting on a bench looking at you while you're walking along, before you get on the belt, they see you walking along at 3 miles an hour. You get on the belt, it looks like you're going 6 miles an hour, and then you get back off the belt and it looks like you're going 3 miles an hour. So that's kind of just a pedestrian example of the idea of a space warp, where you can appear to be going much faster, while locally you really haven't changed anything.
The authors acknowledge that this podcast was recorded on the traditional unceded lands of the Lekwungen peoples. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of Stories from Space. I'm Matt Williams, and with me in the booth today is Harold Sonny White, the former Advanced Propulsion Team Lead at the Advanced Propulsion Physics Laboratory, or Eagleworks, at NASA's Johnson Space Center. He is a distinguished engineer and applied physicist. However, what he is perhaps best known for is his proposal for a new Alcubierre drive system that could lead to a breakthrough in propulsion, specifically in a faster than light drive system that could make interstellar travel a possibility. Yes, Dr. White, thank you for joining us.
Hey, how's it going, Matt? Good to see you today, bud.
In any case, as you can imagine, I've got a lot of questions for you. In particular, since retiring from NASA, you have now joined a new organization that's dedicated to achieving the dream of FTL, known as the Limitless Space Institute. So when exactly did this institute launch, and how did you come by it?
Yeah, great question, Matt. Yeah, so in 2019, towards the end of 2019, a guy by the name of Brian B.K. Kelly reached out to me. He was a retired NASA guy. He was the former head of the Flight Operations Directorate at NASA. So a very well-regarded human being, really neat guy. And so he wanted to talk to me about some education outreach topics. And so in the process of talking with him, it became very obvious that, he wanted me to potentially leave NASA and come help him kind of stand up and define Limitless Space Institute. And so after a lot of thought and prayer, it just felt like I could be a little bit more effective at trying to make progress in this domain of advanced power and propulsion. And so made the decision to pull the D-ring at the end of 2019 and join Limitless Space Institute as the Director of Advanced Research and Development. Let me tell you just a little bit about Limitless Space Institute. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Our mission is to inspire and educate the next generation to travel beyond our solar system and to support the research and development of enabling technologies. And that is enabling interstellar flight that is extremely difficult. When people think of space travel today, they might think of, hey, we're looking at trying to send human beings back to the surface of the moon, or We've got these neat rovers that are on the surface of Mars that are going around doing interesting things. And those are amazing examples of space exploration. Those are all possible using chemical propulsion. If we want to send human beings to the outer solar system, if we want to get a crew from the Earth to Saturn, and we want to get them there in 200 days, the amount of energy that's necessary to make something like that possible is an entire order of magnitude larger than it takes to get a payload from the surface of the Earth to low Earth orbit, right? So all that to say, chemical propulsion can't close that. The physics of chemical propulsion will not close that. So, I mean, what are we to do? Does that mean there's no hope? Is this something we can't even think about? Well, there are things that we can do. It just requires us to think beyond just the basics of chemical propulsion. And I'm going to kind of cover three broad categories spanning what we know and then moving into what we don't know. Firmly within the category of known physics and known engineering, we could have a situation where we use nuclear electric propulsion, right? You got a nuclear reactor that's fissioning uranium, generating electricity, and providing that power to a form of electric propulsion that's ionizing a gas and accelerating it. That type of power and propulsion architecture could take human beings to every destination in our solar system. It's well explored in the literature, well understood. And we have forms of electric propulsion flying all over Earth orbit today and in a couple of interplanetary missions in the solar system. The U.S. has flown one reactor in like the 60s called SNAP-A, a fission-based reactor. The Russians have flown quite a few more reactors. Nothing in the megawatt range, which is what you would arguably need for human nuclear electric propulsion. But at NEP, nuclear electric propulsion would still take, a couple thousand years to get to Proxima Centauri. So that's, it might be interesting to think about for some folks. And I think people talk about a concept called world ships. They might look at that where it's some kind of multi-generational thing, but it's a long time to be sure. If we wanted to get to an interstellar destination a little bit more quickly, we need to move a little bit into the unknown. And if we switch from a fission-based type of power system and we switch to fusion, where instead of fissioning uranium, we're using, say, deuterium and tritium or some combination of gases that we can fuse at very high temperature when they're in the form of a plasma. Fusion propulsion is a little bit more capable than nuclear electric propulsion. Now, I think the one caveat is we don't have fusion reactors all over the planet. So the engineering of a fusion reactor we still have to work that out. But that may actually be a little closer than most people think. But fusion propulsion would enable us to send large payloads to Proxima Centauri in 100 years, maybe a little bit less if you want to get aggressive with the delta V. But if we want to do an interstellar mission to Proxima Centauri, we want to get there in, let's say, 20 years or less. That's where we kind of have to look to the frontiers of physics, move firmly into the unknown, kind of exploring the frontiers. If you think about physics as we know it today, you got quantum mechanics that, defines how the microscopic world behaves, and general relativity describes how the macroscopic world behaves, but these two physics theories are not compatible, right? So we know there's a more generalized understanding that we have yet to figure out. And so in the process of working in the frontiers of what we know of physics today, maybe we'll find new ways to do things that will enable, power and propulsion systems that we currently can't figure out what to build today, like the Alcubierre Warp Drive, right? What do we build to make something like that physically manifest? Right now, it's predominantly in the realm of mathematical physics, and then some people are just starting to explore things that trace to the concept of the Casimir phenomena and so forth. So those are kind of the three different swim lanes, if you will, that we think about at LSI as we try and put rubber to the road as we try and make progress towards our mission statement. So there you go. That's the reason for the switch and kind of what we're about at LSI.
Okay. Well, couple follow-up things there that actually definitely wanted to say generation ships. That's or world ships, as you said. That is a concept there that is it tends to come up all the time there. Anytime anyone's talking about interstellar travel, that is sort of the fallback option, isn't it? It's like we we accept that we can't go fast. We own that. So we're just going to build a huge ship that'll accommodate multiple generations and, hope and pray they don't all kill each other. But yeah.
I've heard a lot of people remark, right? So what happens when a future generation decides, hey, we didn't decide to go on this journey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, you may have an initial generation through some catalyst or crucible decides that this type of a mission is of critical importance. And then they do what's necessary to amass all of that structure and technology and power. And then they depart on this mission. And once they're gone, maybe the catalyst for that doesn't resonate with future generations, 10 generations down the line. What happens then? So,
yeah. And yeah. I would imagine they teach their kids that, Earth is doomed, Earth is gone. You can't go back. That's crazy, but that'll only make them want to do it more. It's like we want to see for ourselves. We want to test this theory out there. I'm thinking, The other thing I want to mention. So the key here is we're talking about crewed missions, right? Because there's currently also a lot of work going on now to do direct energy propulsion. Right. But of course, those concepts they're uncrewed. They're all about just getting a robotic explorer. That's a huge accomplishment. I shouldn't say just.
No, you're right. It's still, and that's our sister organization, Breakthrough Initiatives, is keenly interested in a beamed energy type sail mission to get to an appreciable fraction of the speed of light and get to Proxima Centauri and Alpha Centauri in 20-ish years right now. I mean, they've got to have a pretty big array of lasers on the ground, but there's no physics obstacles for that type of approach. It's just a lot of hard engineering, right? So that's also something we're keenly interested in watching that, and Breakthrough and LSI both collaborate together on a number of things. So.
Oh, good. That's excellent. Yeah.
We awarded Phil Lubin's group an Interstellar Initiative grant as part of our inaugural grant cycle 2020. So we paid for some work for him to mature his laser design to have multiple lasers working in cooperation in the field with a cooperative target. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I'd like to talk more about those, about your research grants and your other efforts there, like your education outreach programs there in just a bit. But I feel I would be really irresponsible if I didn't really try to get you to talk about the Alcubierre Warp Drive. To give you a bit of a personal take there. I remember in 2012, remember the story breaking about how you, during the 100-year Starship conference there, you were preparing to make remarks and you were just sort of going over the equations, and a breakthrough happened where there's like the Alcubierre metric, which describes a warp field. Yes, the original paper by Miguel Alcubierre, he proposed this, but all the research at the time said this would require a prohibitive amount of technology.
Right.
Yes. But then you found a loophole. Can you describe that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So I was asked to kind of give a talk about space warps at the inaugural NASA DARPA 100-year Starship Symposium, and so I didn't just want to kind of rehash what I'd already talked about in the past. So I went through and did some sensitivity analysis with the field equations. I was looking at what happens when you change some of the input parameters to the total energy requirement for the phenomena, just because I want to have something new to talk about. And in the process of doing that, it became very clear that you could significantly reduce the amount of negative vacuum energy density that's necessary to make the trick work. The stuff I published in like 11, 12, and 13, and like 3 different conferences back to back, was kind of the unfolding of that story. I was able to go through and duplicate the best prediction that had been done prior to that by a colleague of mine, Richard Abusi. Richard Abusi had done some analysis to show where he was able to reduce the amount of exotic matter necessary to make the trick work to something about the size of Jupiter. And so I went through and said, all right, well, let's look at a toy spacecraft that's 10 meters in diameter and an effective velocity of 10 C. And if we change this, the parameter I focused on was something called the shell thickness parameter. If I change the shell thickness parameter, I can go through and I can show, I can duplicate Richard's work. So I was able to go through and show with this 10 meter diameter spacecraft with an effective velocity of 10 C. If you construct it in such a way that the shell is a certain thickness, it will require a Jupiter amount of exotic matter. And so I went through the process of changing the shell thickness parameter and showed that by allowing the shell of the warp bubble that forms in the phenomena, allowing it to get thicker, reduces the magnitude of the York time field. And that's think of that as like the strain that you put on space-time, right? So when we think about strain in engineering, if you squeeze something, it compresses, so many inches per inch. It's like a unitless parameter we use when we think about materials. The York time is like a three-dimensional strain. So it's like cubic meters per cubic meter, if you will. And so by making the shell thickness parameter such that you could make the warp bubble thicker, you could reduce the magnitude of the York time. And it's nonlinear. And so by doing that, we were able to reduce the amount of exotic matter from Jupiter down to about 2 metric tons. It's about the size of the Voyager 1 spacecraft, right? And so in my mind, that at least says the idea is not only mathematically possible, right? Because with Jupiter amount of exotic matter, it's just a mathematical model. It's never going to be something that we could do, right? I mean, maybe nature could do it in some weird way that we have yet to discover, but we would never be able to do that with Jupiter. I hate to say the word never, but that seems really impractical. But reducing the amount of exotic matter to something that we can kind of connect with, a couple metric tons, I mean, that at least moves it into the category of plausible, right? That doesn't say anything yet about it being feasible, because we still have to, how do you generate negative vacuum energy density, right? I'm not there on how that might work. But, that's kind of the consensus of the summary of the work that I did in that time frame. Now, you asked me to kind of explain the idea of the Alcubierre warp, and let me do that using kind of a terrestrial analogy that I've used a number of times. We've all traveled via airplanes to different locations around the globe for a multitude of reasons, and we've all been in these really, really big airports that have Terminal A, Terminal B, Terminal E, all these different terminals we have to go to, and we have to change jets as part of our journey. And so normally you walk along at about 3 miles an hour at the airport, and you're going from one gate to another gate. But in some locations you have these horizontal travelators, conveyor belts, if you will, and you're walking along at 3 miles an hour, and then you step on top of this belt. Right, you're still most of us still walk while we're on the belt. So you're walking at 3 miles an hour on the belt, but the belt is actually moving as well. And in conceptually speaking, the belt is contracting space in front of you, and the belt is going underneath and looping back around on the back. And so it's expanding space behind you. So the travelator contracts space in front of you and expands space behind you so that it augments your apparent speed. And so you actually look like you're going faster, even though locally you're still going at 3 miles an hour. So somebody sitting on a bench looking at you while you're walking along, before you get on the belt, they see you walking along at 3 miles an hour. You get on the belt, it looks like you're going 6 miles an hour, and then you get back off the belt and it looks like you're going 3 miles an hour. So that's kind of just a pedestrian example of the idea of a space warp, where you can appear to be going much faster. Well, locally, you really haven't changed anything. You're still doing what you were doing before you turned on the field.
Yeah, and theoretically, this is not inconsistent with general relativity, so yeah, it is a way around the inviolability of relativity in general. There, which
that's what I like to call the 11th commandment of physics: "Thou shalt not exceed the speed of light." Right? The same framework that dictates that speed limit also facilitates these potential pathways that we could potentially cover stellar distances in non-trivially short periods of time without breaking that 11th commandment. So,
yes. Now, as I understand it, mainly because I looked it up a while ago, Negative vacuum energy. This refers to theoretical work there of Paul Dirac and others who said that the vacuum of space is filled with negative energy, and it's like the counterpart to gravitational energy. And it's a positive and a negative in sort of the same way as potential and kinetic energy. Would that be a fair comparison?
So let me kind of communicate it the following way, right? And it's interesting. So, Alcubierre's paper that he published on the idea of this little space warp concept he came up with, he talked about that within the context of general relativity, the field equations require exotic matter. What is exotic matter within the framework of general relativity? It's negative mass or negative energy. And so there's no clear path that we understand today and how you could go through and make a bottle of that, right? It's not like we have a pump that has Acme exotic matter that you can go fill up a tank or something like that. Within the context of general relativity, we don't know how to do that, right? But remember what I talked about in the beginning of the discussion. If you think about the frontiers of physics, there's a Venn diagram. There's two circles on this Venn diagram, and they kind of touch at one little tangent point. General relativity is the macroscopic understanding of things, and quantum mechanics is the microscopic understanding of things. And so within the context of quantum mechanics, there's this phenomenon called negative vacuum energy density, which has all the mathematical characteristics of exotic matter in general relativity. And so Alcubierre, in his paper that he published, his inaugural paper, he highlighted the fact that although general relativity doesn't tell us exactly how to go through and make exotic matter, we could potentially look to quantum mechanics and try and explore this phenomenon called negative vacuum energy density. And he even goes so far to specifically talk about the phenomenon known as the Casimir force. And so the Casimir force is actually a macroscopically measurable manifestation of this quantum vacuum, this negative vacuum energy density in the quantum vacuum. And so let me take you through just a 2-minute explanation of the Casimir phenomenon. I think that's a great illustration of the concept of negative vacuum energy density. So we're going to conduct a little thought experiment. If we imagine for a moment that my hands are two metallic plates, they're very tiny, right? And you put them very, very close to one another. We're talking like microns separated, right? So these are two very tiny plates separated by microns or even submicron distances. We take those two plates and we put them into a vacuum chamber, and we turn on the vacuum pumps and we pull out all of the air out of that vacuum chamber so that there's absolutely no molecules of air in that vacuum chamber. And we're going to imagine for a moment, Matt, that you have superpowers and you can shrink yourself down to being a tiny little atomic person. And we're going to send you into the vacuum chamber, and you're going to go through and you're going to go measure the pressure on the outside of the plates and the pressure between the plates, right? Or conversely, the energy density on the outside of the plates, the energy density in between the plates. Now, our classical physics understanding of the world, the macroscopic way things move, you push and things move and air molecules move and so forth. Our expectation is that you would report back that you would measure zero pressure on the outside of the plates and zero pressure in between the plates. But what you would actually measure is you would measure zero pressure on the outside of the plates, but you would measure a negative pressure in between the two plates. And so that results in a force that wants to pull those two plates together, right? And so what happens is the presence of the two plates in the quantum vacuum restrict which vacuum fluctuations can pop into and out of existence. And so when you integrate over all the frequencies of the vacuum fluctuations that can appear on the outside of the plates versus inside of the plates, there is this deficiency between the two. And so there is a negative vacuum energy density that occurs as a result of those two plates, or those two potentials, if you will, in the quantum vacuum, restricting those vacuum fluctuation modes. Now, the Casimir force was derived in 1948 by Casimir. I believe he was working with fluorescent light bulbs, of all things. But it was measured to the physics community's satisfaction in 1996 by, I think, Lamoureux. There's a paper by Lamoureux. And it's been measured numerous times since then in a lot of different configurations. And they've also explored the fact that the Casimir phenomenon, the Casimir force of these two plates, right? I was talking about the force that wants to pull these two plates together. There's also a force called this transverse Casimir force that wants to try and work against moving those two plates relative to one another. So it's like this stickiness, if you will, of the quantum vacuum. So the quantum realm, I think, really highlights the fact that we've got some more work to do to try and understand nature at this fundamental level. But this the state that exists between these two plates has a lot of appealing characteristics, kind of mapped to what the Alcubierre stuff requires. So maybe there's hope. We'll see.
I wanted to say, in effect, when you released your findings there, 2012, at the a year later after you were doing them at the 100-year Starship conference, that blew my mind somewhat there. I thought, oh my God, really? I'd given up on the idea that FTL was, conceivable. I figured that, I figured light huggers was the closest we were ever going to get. And I thought, well, yeah, in order to do a lot of science fiction, in order to explore a lot of tropes, you need something that can go faster than light. Otherwise, it's like, well, how do the aliens ever meet us? How do different, planets of human populations meet each other and mix? It would take so long. And
the TV episodes would be, very long spans of nothing happening, right? So.
Yeah. Or there's just massive time skips. It's like, what happened to Captain So-and-so? It's like, they're dead now. It's 400 years later. Jeez, keep up.
Yeah. This is Captain Phil the 14th, right? So.
Yeah. Oh God, yeah. Well, that would make for some interesting stuff there, but I just don't think it would be accessible. Most people would just change the channel.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. From all of us here at Stories from Space, I want to thank Dr. Sonny White for coming in and really giving us a wonderful rundown on the ongoing research into FTL and making interstellar travel happen. And I also want to say to the listeners, if your minds are blown at this point, that's the proper feeling. If they weren't, I'd be worried. So thank you so much, Dr. White.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it, bud. Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stories from Space podcast with Matthew Williams. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.